Thousands of students from Canada's largest school board will likely have a delayed start to their school year. Officials at the Toronto District School Board say it is very unlikely now that learning will resume when it's supposed to, just after Labor Day, September the 8th. The Ontario government has given boards in the province permission to stagger the start of classes by 2 weeks to ramp up safety. That delay would apply to both elementary and secondary schools. All students are expected to be back and learning by September the 22nd. The TDSB is going to be voting today on some of the things it is looking at, its measures for its schools, including this staggered start. Back to school is such a pressing issue for the millions of Canadian families across this country, about 5.5 million Canadians getting set to return to school. And Andre Picard has been writing about this regularly. You've probably read of late his award-winning columns in the Globe and Mail. He joins us again from Montreal, and it's always wonderful to see you. Hello, Andre.
Good morning.
You're speaking to me just after you were speaking with your Globe readers last night. I was following along that Facebook Live you did on this very issue of back to school. What did you hear from the people as part of that, you know, the state of mind? What struck you? What was the recurring theme in terms of questions? Anything stand out?
I think the recurring theme the last couple of weeks with parents has been just this overwhelming anxiety. Rarely have I seen an issue that has people just so fretful and just angry about the lack of information. So I think that's the one. People want some clear guidance. They're not sure what to do. They're afraid. Everybody wants to do the best for their children. And there's a real lack of clarity. Every school board has different rules. Everyone's delaying, changing their minds. So it's really, really difficult for parents to make a decision.
Or to trust the information that they're getting. And maybe this is partly why we're hearing that up to 40% of parents are looking at this point like they're not going to send their children back to school because they can't trust that they're making the right decision for their children. What are you concerned about the consequences of that, Andre?
Well, I think, it's important for children to be in school, not just to learn, but to socialize, to allow their parents to get back to work for the economy. So there's many reasons for children to be in school, but we have to make sure we do it safely. And I think this debate has reached a point where we've just frightened people unduly. It's, this is concerning. This is a pandemic virus, but, it's not going to come down and kill children in their desks at school. I think we've kind of lost perspective on this, that we can do this safely. We have examples from many countries around the world, and we have to stop having these fights about every little tiny detail and just get a plan so parents can wrap their head around it and decide, do I feel comfortable with this plan, and am I going to send my child back?
You have been consistent and forceful in arguing for the details, the things you think need to be in any plan in order for school to be safe. Small classes, bubbles, decent ventilation, good sanitation. Am I missing anything at the points that you have made?
No, I think those are the big ones, yeah.
When you want to expand on anything, what are you seeing across the country as you look at the landscape? Are you seeing sufficient attention to those key areas, or enough of a focus and the fact that that is going to exist?
I think the one that concerns me the most is class size. So I think when we have some classes in Ontario, they're going to have 30, 38 children in them. I just don't see that being viable. We really have to have the fewest number of children grouped together at any one time, and that's to avoid spread. And also, if there is a case, to make it much easier to track it down and nip it in the bud. So I think what we've learned from countries elsewhere in the world is that's really essential. The class size, limiting the cohorts, so what you want is the least interaction possible between groups of children, because that's when you get this multiplicative effect of a disease spreading if one person is sick. And the other one we didn't mention is probably the most important of all, is we have to have very little COVID or very little coronavirus circulating in the community. If there's no virus circulating, kids are going to be safe. If there's none out there, they can't get sick. So that's really the key one.
On the class size piece, though, I mean, what you hear across the country in provinces and boards and from teachers is we don't have enough teachers, don't have enough space.
Yeah, so these Cant arguments are the ones I think that frustrate me and the parents. It's not a question of can't, it's a question of let's figure out how to do it. Do we have to have a shorter school day so that there are more teachers to go around? Do we have to bring back teachers who are retired? We have a lot of teachers who train other teachers. Maybe we have to get them back in the classroom. I think a lot of these questions, a lot of these can't do it. We can do it. Other countries have done it, and we just have to sit down and figure it out instead of throwing up our hands. And I think that's what parents want to hear. They want to hear viable solutions. They don't want to hear excuses.
And yet the clock is still ticking. I mentioned they're back to class in Yukon, where there are no cases admittedly, but they're back to class in the Ottawa French Catholic Board. It is looming across the country, so just weeks away. Now we're starting to hear about staggered start times. Andre, is there time to get all of this in place?
Yeah, I think certainly it's better to do it right than to rush it. But there's a frustration for parents. I think we've had a good idea since May, June, that probably we weren't going back to a normal world by the new school year. I think we wasted the whole summer doing very little preparing our classes, and now we're in this big panic. So that's frustration. But if it has to be delayed a couple of weeks to give us peace of mind, to ensure that children are safe, better to wait a little bit.
One thing that you make clear, too, in your writing is that safely does not mean there won't be any cases. You acknowledge that there is a risk of cases, but you call repeatedly for schools to have a plan B. Again, what would that entail, and are you seeing boards and provinces paying sufficient attention to getting that in place?
Well, when I talk about Plan B, I talk about, say a child is infected in a class, what's the procedure then? Do you quarantine the whole class? Do you shut down the school? You have to have a clear rule, so the parents know what to expect. And I think you have to have sort of this green light, red light system. If there's too much coronavirus in the community, we have to set a measure and say at this point we close the schools again. So we have to be prepared for that. But it's not. We don't have any guidelines like that. Saying, at what point do we shut things down? We don't know. And that has to be decided in advance. You can't decide that on the fly once kids are back in school for a few weeks.
It strikes me that some of the things that we're talking about this morning are very similar to what we talked about the last time we had a conversation, which was several weeks ago. Not all that much seems to have changed. Am I wrong in that? I mean, have they really made progress toward handling this properly?
No, again, and I think that's the big frustration of parents is that, if anything, we're backwards in many cases about what we were talking about weeks ago. We've brought in all these tiny details and obsessed about them, and we haven't kept our eye on the ball. How do we get children back into a class safely with the fewest number possible, with the least interaction? That's what we have to talk about, and not every other thing under the sun.
Wow. No wonder parents aren't trusting, are worried and confused. And just to conclude, I just was struck by your last piece, the line that says it's about as safe as it's ever going to be to send kids to school during a pandemic. Despite all of what we've talked about, do you still believe that it's about as safe as it's ever going to be?
Absolutely. We have very low community rates in most of the countries. There's a couple of little hot spots, but it's very low rates. It's a good time of year. We can have windows open in school, etc. We have to try it out and figure out how to make this work, especially if, and we know this is the case, this coronavirus is going to be with us for years. There's this idea of kids never going back to school has to be a non-starter. So here's a good time to figure it out, get it right, and then we can adjust as the coronavirus adjusts to ensure that kids stay safe in their schools.
Come back, if you would, once we see how things are actually unfolding in the country. Andre Picard, always great to have you on the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.